It happened in the dead of night, the flash of explosions lighting up the horizon above Tehran. Within minutes, social media feeds filled with unverified clips showing what appeared to be U.S. cruise missiles striking Iranian military installations. The Pentagon confirmed soon after American forces had carried out precision strikes against what it called critical Iranian targets in direct response to a series of coordinated attacks on U.S. personnel across the Middle East. The announcement sent shockwaves across the globe, and now the question on every mind is the world standing at the edge of another catastrophic war. For months, tensions had been building. Proxy forces aligned with Iran had been launching drone and rocket attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. American troops stationed there had been on constant alert. Intelligence reports suggested that Tehran was planning a large-scale retaliation for Israeli strikes in Lebanon and Syria. The region was already on edge, but few believed it would come to this, a direct American military strike on Iranian soil. According to U.S. officials, the strikes were limited and precise, aimed only at Iran's missile command centers and drone production facilities. But inside Iran, the government painted a very different picture, one of blatant aggression and a direct violation of its sovereignty. Iranian state TV broadcast footage of smoldering debris, angry crowds filling the streets, and the nation's supreme leader vowing that the enemies will pay dearly. The Revolutionary Guard declared a state of full alert and promised a harsh and immediate response. The world looked to chaos. In global capitals, from Washington to Moscow, Beijing to Brussels, emergency meetings were called. Oil prices soared overnight, crossing $120 a barrel for the first time in years. Air traffic across the Gulf was rerouted, embassies went into lockdown, and in the corridors of power, leaders were asking the same question the public was, how far will this go? Inside the White House, U.S. officials defended the decision. They argued that the strike was not an act of war, but one of defense. After weeks of provocations, they claimed America had no choice but to act. We will protect our forces and our interests, said the president, addressing the nation. We do not seek war with Iran, but we will respond decisively to aggression. His words were measured, but his actions spoke louder. Iran, meanwhile, mobilized. Reports emerged that ballistic missile units were being repositioned near the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian Navy began conducting live fire drills in the Persian Gulf, and intelligence sources confirmed that Iran's network of proxy militias from Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthis in Yemen had been placed on high alert. A web of alliances that stretched across the Middle East was suddenly alive and ready to strike back. In Israel, the government convened an emergency security session. Officials feared that Iranian retaliation could come in the form of rocket attacks from Hezbollah along the northern border. Israeli air defenses were activated across the country. In Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Qatar airbases hosting American troops tightened security, preparing for possible missile or drone strikes. Across the region, there was a sense that something irreversible had begun. And yet, this was not just a regional conflict anymore, it was a global moment. Russia immediately condemned the U.S. strike, calling it a reckless provocation that threatens international stability. China warned that any further escalation could push the world toward uncontrollable conflict. Both nations demanded an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. European leaders called for restraint, but privately many feared that diplomacy was already slipping away. What made this moment so dangerous was not just the strike itself, but the fragile balance of power that it threatened to unravel. For decades, the United States and Iran have fought a shadow war through proxies, intelligence operations, and sanctions. But direct confrontation has always been avoided, precisely because both sides understand how catastrophic such a war could be. Now, that line may have finally been crossed. To understand how we got here, we have to go back through decades of mistrust, revolution, and power politics. Since 1979, when the Islamic Revolution overthrew the U.S.-backed Shah, relations between Washington and Tehran have been defined by hostility. The U.S. Embassy hostage crisis, the Iran-Iraq War, the downing of Iran Air Flight 655, the sanctions, the nuclear deal, each chapter has deepened the wounds. And in the past few years, with the collapse of the nuclear agreement and the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in 2020, the path toward confrontation has only grown narrower. Iran's strategy has been consistent: build influence through regional proxies. From Hezbollah in Lebanon to militias in Iraq and the Houthis in Yemen, Tehran has built a network capable of striking U.S. and allied targets without direct confrontation. The U.S., on the other hand, has relied on its unmatched military power and alliances, Israel, Saudi Arabia, NATO, to contain Iranian ambitions. For years, both sides have danced dangerously close to open war, pulling back at the last moment. This time, neither seems ready to step back. On the streets of Tehran, tens of thousands of Iranians march carrying flags and pictures of fallen soldiers. To them, this was not an isolated strike. It was another chapter in decades of Western aggression. They think they can bomb us into submission, one protester told Iranian TV, but every bomb only makes us stronger. The government seized on the anger, rallying the population around national pride and resistance. In Washington, reactions were divided. Some hailed the strike as a show of strength, arguing that the U.S. must reassert its dominance after years of perceived weakness. Others accused the administration of recklessness, warning that the country was sliding into another endless war. "We've seen this movie before," one senator said grimly, "and it doesn't end well." The media, as always, amplified the divide. Cable networks replayed missile footage and satellite images, each headline more alarming than the last. Analysts debated whether Iran would retaliate directly or through its proxies. Intelligence insiders leaked reports suggesting that Iranian cyber units were preparing attacks on Western infrastructure. Hashtags like WB3 Iran strike and Fay Middle East war began trending worldwide. In the Persian Gulf, U.S. aircraft carriers moved closer to Iranian waters. Fighter jets flew patrols along the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical oil route. Every movement, every radar ping, every miscalculated maneuver carried the risk of sparking a full-blown confrontation. Military strategists call this the accident zone, the point at which even a single error, a single missile fired by mistake, can trigger an unstoppable chain reaction. And then the retaliation came. Just 48 hours after the U.S. strikes, Iranian missiles targeted an American base in Iraq. Dozens of rockets rained down in the early hours of the morning. Sirens wailed as soldiers scrambled for cover. While the U.S. reported minimal casualties, the message was clear: Iran had drawn its line. The world watched, wondering if Washington would strike back again, or if diplomacy would somehow find a way to intervene. Behind closed doors, back-channel communications began. Qatar, Oman, and Turkey stepped in to mediate, quietly urging restraint on both sides. Russia reportedly reached out to Iranian officials, advising caution, while China called for an immediate ceasefire. But as the rhetoric intensified, the chances of de-escalation grew slimmer. Economically, the ripple effects were already global. Stock markets in Asia and Europe fell sharply. The price of oil and gold surged as investors sought safety. Airlines canceled flights across the Middle East, rerouting traffic around Iranian airspace. The memory of 2020, when a Ukrainian airliner was shot down amid U.S.-Iran tensions, still haunted travelers and governments alike. Experts warn that if this conflict continues, it could reshape global alliances. Iran, already under heavy sanctions, could deepen its ties with Russia and China, forming a new axis against U.S. influence. In turn, Washington might push its European allies to take a harder stance, further dividing the world into rival blocs. The potential consequences stretch far beyond the Middle East. From the Taiwan Strait to Eastern Europe, every rival power is watching, calculating, and preparing for what comes next. For ordinary people, though, it's fear that dominates. In Tehran, families line up at gas stations worried about shortages. In Baghdad and Beirut, the sound of drones overhead has become part of daily life. In the U.S., veterans and families brace for news that their loved ones may once again be deployed to the Middle East. The sense of déjà vu is overwhelming, a feeling that history is repeating itself, that humanity has learned nothing from decades of war, and yet amid all the chaos, there are voices calling for peace. Activists across the world are demanding restraint, warning that another major conflict could push millions into poverty and displace countless families. Diplomats, even those from rival nations, are pushing for talks, recognizing that in a world armed with nuclear weapons, there are no winners in total war. Still, the path forward remains uncertain. Iran's leadership has vowed that any further U.S. aggression will be met with unprecedented force. American officials, meanwhile, insist that they will not back down. The atmosphere is one of controlled rage. Two powers staring each other down across the desert, both unwilling to blink first. Late-night intelligence briefings describe the situation as unstable but contained. But containment can crumble in seconds. In the Middle East, wars rarely begin with grand declarations. They begin with miscalculations, a drone that flies too far, a radar that mistakes a passenger jet for a missile, a commander who reacts without orders. In the fog of war, mistakes become tragedies, and tragedies become history. As the standoff deepens, the world finds itself once again on the edge of the unknown. For decades, the post-World War II order has survived on deterrence, the belief that no nation would dare start a war it couldn't win. But that belief feels fragile now. With superpowers aligning on opposite sides, the smallest spark could ignite a global inferno. The question then is not whether the US and Iran will fight again. It's whether the rest of the world will be dragged into the flames. Will NATO back the US? Will Russia and China deepen their defense ties with Tehran? Could the war spread to the Gulf, the Mediterranean, even the Pacific? These are not distant hypotheticals anymore. They are scenarios actively being discussed in military briefings around the world. As the sun rises over the Gulf, oil tankers move cautiously through the Strait of Hormuz. American destroyers escort them, scanning for threats. Iranian patrol boats lurk nearby, their crews tense, fingers near the trigger. Overhead, drones hum silently, watching, recording, waiting. It is a fragile peace, the kind that exists only because both sides know what the alternative looks like. For now, diplomacy is the world's last defense. tense. Negotiators in Geneva, Doha, and Istanbul continue to talk behind closed doors, hoping to cool tempers before another missile flies. The United Nations pleads for restraint, reminding both nations that a regional war in the Middle East could destabilize the entire planet. But in the age of instant reaction and political pressure, reason often loses to pride. So, as the world watches, one truth becomes clear: we are living through a turning point. Whether it becomes another crisis that passes into history or the spark that ignites a global conflict will depend on the decisions made in the next few days. The balance of peace has never been more delicate, nor the stakes higher. And somewhere, in the skies above the Persian Gulf, as satellites monitor every movement and radar systems hum in the dark, the world holds its breath, waiting to see if the next flash of light will be a signal of restraint or the beginning of something far worse. The story of the US and Iran has always been one of conflict and calculation, of pride and survival. But now, it may also become the story of how the world stumbled toward the edge of another war, not because anyone wanted it, but because no one was willing to step back. And as the night deepens, one haunting question remains: is this the moment history will remember as the spark that set the world ablaze? Or will humanity for once pull back from the brink? Because sometimes, the difference between war and peace is just one decision away.